I think if you watch the news every day, you see that there's always some sort of a threat going on, whether it's somebody with a knife, somebody with a bomb, somebody with a gun.
We realized that with what was going on in society, with multiple active shooters, occurrences happening across the country, we felt we weren't immune to having that in our own neighborhood.
So the Office of Emergency Management recognized that we didn't have a unified plan within the city. And that really comes down to how are police, fire, and EMS going to work with the hospitals, the schools, and other organizations to ensure that they have an updated and unified procedure for active threat response.
Yeah, the planning effort that went into this particular day of exercise was tremendous.
We had a series of meetings beginning about a year ago where we identified the gaps in our planning for active threat events and then pulled together the key responders to review this to see if we could do something that was better.
We chose to do an active shooter type scenario because those are some of the most difficult incidents to respond to because of the violent nature of them and because they tend to result in mass casualties.
I got a casualty directly in front of me. Looks like a gunshot wound to the head.
This was fast, hard-hitting. You had somebody pointing a gun at you. You had someone pointing the gun back to the police. You had people down on the floor. You had people bleeding.
I think what made this drill feel real was the fact that police officers were walking around with weapons drawn. And anytime you see that, you're in an environment that you're not often in, and it brings you to a whole new level of what you're experiencing.
An active shooter scenario is probably the most stressful scenario that any human being can find themselves in. Having the ability and opportunity to train an active shooter type scenario in a high threat or high stress environment will really set us up for success in the future because it's allowing us to work those skills and rehearse our response capabilities under stress, so it's most similar to the real life situation.
Basically, we're an all-hazards agency. We have to be prepared for pretty much anything. There's no 1011 that we can call when we get to a call and things aren't going right.
It's Saturday morning, it's 7 o'clock, and our volunteers for the victims start to arrive. They met with folks from a group called Aero Security that specialize in moulaging people with specific injuries and coaching them with their injuries, how to react, how to scream, how to yell.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
How to not react.
Prior to the start of the drill, we conducted a safety briefing, so it's extremely important to do those so that role players know exactly what their roles are and everyone participating in the scenario knows exactly what the footprint of the drill entails as well as what they should be doing as part of the drill.
So at 9 o'clock, I took the first group of people from the health system and set them up in the training area, and we set things up so that they knew the exercise was beginning when one of us would yell down the hallway, "Alpha, Alpha, Alpha," and that gave everyone the heads up that the shooting was about to start. And that's when the shooter did come in. Came right into the waiting room of the treatment area, took out a couple of the people there, worked out his way down back, and started shooting at staff there. Came back out into the waiting area, went back down the hallway where he engaged the police officers that were coming in.
At the start of the scenario, officers began responding to the scene. They came up through the upper floor hallway on their way to where the actual active shooter was located. On their way through the main hallway, they actually encountered the gunman and it began a gunfight between the two. So the gunman exchanged gunfire with the responding officers. The purpose of having that part of the scenario was to test whether the officers would push forward and neutralize the threat in that situation, or to see whether they actually barricade in place and set up a perimeter, which would be the wrong response for our officers. That mistake was made years ago in Columbine. We've since learned that that is not an effective way for handling active shooter scenarios because it allows the shooter to then further kill and wound more individuals.
Once the shooting starts, that's when we train our staff to announce Code Silver. Code Silver, Emergency Department. Code Silver, Emergency. Code Silver immediately engages other staff to call 911, and it engages staff to also clear the area. If you're outside of the area when it's paged, you don't go there. You stay away from it. And if you are caught up in the area, you escape if you can, or you barricade yourself for safety.
The training definitely worked. They went over what we needed to do, which is opposite of what healthcare providers usually try to do, which is basically to run, hide, or fight. And in my circumstance, I had to hide, and we barricaded ourselves in the office and locked the door, even though we wanted to help.
You guys know each other? You both work here? Let's go. Any injuries? No. Okay.
And there are 3 zones of care in these scenarios. There's the hot zone, or what's called direct care under fire, where only probably a police officer might be providing care to somebody if he or she is not actively engaging the shooter. Now, once the shooter is eliminated and they've got things pretty well buttoned up, but they're not 100% sure, they term it the warm zone. And this is where they carefully move patients to a centralized collection point and organize the fire department in groups to bring them in and provide that initial care. The warm zone is then transitioned to the cold zone, an area that's away from the hot zone and warm zone that's considered 100% safe. There is no likelihood of somebody getting shot at. And that's where AMR was staged to receive the patients from Nashville Fire Department.
During the active threat drill, the initial responding officers responded into the crisis location and aggressively searched for the suspect.
Is that right?
Once that was done and the threat was neutralized on that, a warm zone was established. Once the warm zone was established, the initial responding officers called for a rescue task force, which came up from the staging area. The rescue task force is comprised of police and fire personnel.
So the basic job of the firefighters, once they form up with the police officers into the rescue task forces, they'll go from the cold zone into the warm zone, and then they'll proceed to any casualty collection points that have already been set up. Those are set up by the police officers. Those are all the people that they've been able to safely remove to one collection area. And then our folks will go in with the police officers guarding them. They'll perform any EMS that needs to be done, any gross bleeding control. It kind of goes out of our normal protocols for being EMTs, where we treat everything. We treat airways, we do CPR, that sort of thing. All bets are off at this point. Bleeding is what's going to kill these people, so we need to stop the bleeding, and we need to get them outside to definitive care.
Rescue Task Force is trained to move a patient in any way they can. So in many cases, Nashua Fire have their own extrication equipment. But if they start running low on those supplies, you can grab anything to move a patient.
We have what we call skeds, which are basically plastic roll-up sleds like you may have had as a child, where we can put people on. They're pretty smooth. One firefighter can drag a person in that. We have leather straps that are fairly similar, where 2 firefighters can almost cocoon somebody in a leather strap and drag them out. We've removed people on rolling office chairs. I saw one person get removed on a wagon that was in the room. At this point, it's any means to get them out.
Because what people don't realize, especially with the Rescue Task Force, they'll put the tourniquets on, they'll put the bandages on, and then they have to move those patients who knows how far. And in that movement, things happen. Tourniquets get loose, bandages fall off, patients get worse. And it's at that point when the transition of care goes to the evacuation site, which is where AMR comes in.
The EMS teams typically in these scenarios don't go into the active threat. We wait on the outside, if you will. The victims are brought to us and we rapidly treat them and move them to a medical facility. Time is of the essence in situations like this. We have a very small window of time to make sure that we can get somebody to definitive care and save their life. And a lot of things have to go right to make that happen.
The training that we focused on for this exercise for the medical portion was all based around the Tactical Emergency Casualty Care Program. This is a civilian offshoot of a military program that is very similar. Nashua is very fortunate. We've got some Iraq and Afghan veterans who have been trained in this. Some of them are on the police department, some are on the fire department, and they were able to help us to learn how to use these devices. And they include tourniquets. There's a bandage called the Elias bandage. There are chest seals, quick clot. These are the things that we have trained with for this exercise to potentially use if something like this were to occur in the city.
The end of the training day, we conducted a debrief after all the scenarios had ended, and the importance of conducting those debriefs is to identify where things went well and then where things, where we could make improvements.
When we talk about how people respond to an active threat situation, it typically results with either fight, flight, or freeze.
What is going on?
Hearing those screams, hearing the people who are moulaged up and being rushed around, it is an emotional event, and I think the staff handled it very well.
This training will be very helpful in the future, and I think more and more facilities should use this training. I know I've already brought it back to my staff members and my friends and family. It's really important to teach these methods and to save as many lives as possible in, unfortunate circumstances like these.
I think one of the takeaways from this is that it's a really good example of how Southern New Hampshire Health, National Fire Rescue, the Police Department, and AMR, among other partners, work together to keep Nashua safe.
The only way a unified plan for an active threat is going to work is if these people get the opportunity to practice and work together.
Something like this happens for real, it's not going to be, hi, I'm so-and-so, it's Mark, this is what we've got going on. Or Joe from police, Mark, this is what we need you to do. Or Chris from AMR, or Rick from the fire department. We already know each other, and we know each other well. It was a very good training day.